So welcome everyone. My name's Bridget. I'm the Assistant Director of International Enrollment here at Niagara University. My role is to assist students through the application process, decision process, and things like that. With me today, we have Dr. Amanda Barber of our Brennan Center and International Relations Office. Her role is to assist Serena Munzi, who I'm sure some of you have connected with students through the I-20 and visa process. We currently have students registered from 30 different countries joining us today on the meeting. If you do have questions, we're going to ask you to save all of your questions to the end, just because Amanda has a lot of information to cover and it'll be tough to kind of toss back and forth. So feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat box, and then my student assistant Ella will be saving those for the Q&A session at the end. So with that being said, Amanda, do you want to take it away?
So good morning for those of you that are here in Buffalo, close to us geographically. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're coming from. So as Bridget said, my name is Dr. Amanda Barber. I'm the Assistant Director for English Language Programming here at Niagara University. So my role here is twofold. The one that is probably most relevant for you joining us today is that I oversee the SEVP processes here at NU. SEVP is the Student Exchange and Visitor Program. So that is the federal government piece that allows you to come here as a non-immigrant student and join us at NU. So I am the PDSO, which means I'm the primary designated school official. So I oversee all of the CVIS and SEVP operations. As Bridget said, you've probably dealt with my colleague, Ms. Serena Munzi, who is the DSO and helps greatly in the day-to-day lifting of making sure you all have your documents that you need to come join us. So in addition to assisting you with the intake process, getting you your I-20, making sure you've got your appointment for your F1 interview, we do also have wraparound services. So we continue to support you once you're here at NU. And that's just to help make sure that you are taking advantage of and maximizing your rights and privileges as an international student. So whether that looks like working while you're here, pursuing an internship, we want to make sure that you are educated about what you can do as an international student here. And then, as I mentioned, I do also oversee the English language programming. So for students who speak a language other than English as their first or primary language, we have non-credit programs so they can intensively study English. And then we also do have credit-bearing classes to help students transition from their home culture, their home format of learning to the format we see most commonly in higher ed in the United States. So that's a bit about my role at NU. Today, as Bridget mentioned, we're going to focus on the I-20 Certificate of Eligibility and the F1 visa process. I've got a few slides here that I'll just share in a second that will hopefully illustrate and demystify this process for you all. I know there's a lot of anxiety around this process, but hopefully after today, you'll feel very confident in preparing your documents. As Bridget said, all questions are welcome. I just won't be taking them as we're going along. We'll wait until the end and we'll have a Q&A period. And then also do please keep in mind, this is not the appropriate format for case-specific questions. So if you do have concerns about an application you may have submitted, or you want me to look over your application, you will have my contact information and I'm more than happy to assist you privately one-on-one, but we'll focus on more general questions for the purposes of this presentation. So let me go ahead and share my screen and get going with this presentation here. Okay, and Bridget, how's that look on your end? Give me a thumbs up if we're, okay, perfect. So you will see here that we have just a real general overview, a broad scale overview of the F1 visa process. And the F1 visa is the visa that would allow you to come here, as I mentioned, as a non-immigrant student. So that's what you should all be looking to apply for, okay? So we're gonna break it down into very manageable steps, again, so you can feel confident in moving forward after we close our presentation today. So your first step is to apply to Niagara University. I really cannot assist you with your application for immigration documentation until you are an accepted student at Niagara University. So your first point of contact is always going to be Bridget, and she is going to assist you with your application, acceptance, and deposit as an intended student at NU. Once that is all taken care of, you are then referred to our office, and that's when you will hear from me or again, my colleague Serena Munzie, and you'll receive your I-20 application via email. A lot of this is done over email. Obviously, the standard postal service would be quite a lengthy process. So most of this is just done and completed all online. So we'll take a look exactly what that I-20 certificate of eligibility application looks like in just a minute. And again, I'll walk you through that piece by piece. So at this point, you've applied, you've been accepted, you've deposited, and you have your I-20 application. The next step, you are going to complete the application. There's really only 3 pages of information that you need to fill out. So it's not terribly lengthy. We do also then require a copy of your passport and proof of financial eligibility. And this could be a bank statement, it could be a letter from your bank, it could be a retirement account. And again, we'll go into detail on what we look for proof of financial eligibility. Please do remember this should all be in English. We have applications coming from around the world. So in terms of our linguistic ability, we're looking for documents in English, and your consulate or embassy is also going to want your documents to be in English. So keep that in mind when you're preparing all of your materials. Once you have that completed packet, you're going to actually email it to our office, okay? And again, the timeline for this is generally 3 to 4 months prior to your program starting. So if you are going to be joining us in the fall, we look for an application usually around, I would say, late April, early May. And that should give you plenty of time to get everything in order and get an appointment at your embassy or consulate. We cannot accept or act on applications that arrive earlier than 6 months from the program start date. And that's because there are strict regulations about how recent your documentation must be. So for example, if you're sending us a bank statement and it's dated last December and you're starting with us in August, it would not be permissible. So in order to make sure that everything is in line with regulations, we really encourage that 3 to 4 month timeline. And again, that should give you plenty of time to have all of your documents in order and arrive on time for the start of the semester. So the next step is we actually review and process your I-20 application. And so we look over the 3 pages of information you gave us to make sure it's completed and clear. We check your passport because your passport does have to have validity past the end of your program. So it shouldn't be expiring while you're a student here. And then most closely, we check your proof of financial eligibility. So we look over all of that documentation, and if we have concerns, we'll absolutely be in touch. I never want students to think that, you know, if their documents aren't as they should be, they'll receive a rejection. That's not really how the I-20 process works. We work with you to make sure your documents are acceptable. So it would just be an email correspondence. We would explain what the problem is and then work to correct it. So once we've got a complete and accurate application, we then enter you into our SEVIS system. And again, that's the Student Exchange Visitor System. And that links up with the government. So then we are allowed to issue you an I-20. The I-20 is your document that allows you to then make an appointment at your embassy or consulate. So in order to receive your I-20, we can email them. That started during COVID and has continued. So we are able to email you a scanned copy of your I-20. We do also really encourage that you make arrangements to receive your I-20 via mail. If everyone could just mute themselves, thanks so much. So again, you can have a digital I-20, but we do still encourage you to make arrangements to have a hard copy mailed to you as well. Then you'll have your documents and you'll be able to go online and pay the SEVIS fee. You can see on our timeline there, the SEVIS fee, you know, it's not a non-negligible amount of money, $350. It's quite a large sum. This is a federal fee though, so it's not something that Niagara University has control over. That money is not coming to us. It's basically a fee that the US government charges for you to be able to make that appointment at the embassy or consulate for your interview, okay? So you pay your fee, and then you have your visa interview. If it goes well, and we'll go over tips to make sure it does go well, you would then be issued your F1 visa, and you'd have all of your documents that you need to come to the United States. The final step there then would be to start making your travel arrangements. And obviously during COVID, that can be a little bit tricky these days. You do have up to 30 days before your program start date to enter the United States. Okay, so if your program's starting the end of August, by the beginning of August, you would be able to enter the United States without any issues. And then also please remember, our international students are required to check in with myself or Serena at the beginning of the semester. And that's all international students, so new and returning. And that's just our opportunity to make sure that you are maintaining your status. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, not only do we help with intake and getting you your I-20 and F1 visa, but we also make sure while you're here, you are appropriately maintaining your status. That check-in allows us to do that. Just a quick note, I do want to remind everyone, reviewing and issuing an I-20 does not happen overnight. I know a lot of students are very eager to get their documents, and I totally understand, but you do want to plan for at least a 2 to 3 week turnaround time. And that's for a couple of different reasons. Obviously, the amount of applications we have coming in is significant, but then it is important that both myself and Serena do take a careful, close look at the documents you are sending to us. Not only because we want to make sure that your I-20 application is appropriate and in line with regulations, but if you take documents that have any issues to your visa interview, you could be denied for those purposes. So we really are the first step to setting you up for a successful visa interview. So it's important that you work with us and give us enough time to make sure you have everything in order before we then send you that I-20. Okay? So this is, again, just a broad overview of that F1 visa process. And now we're going to take a closer look at the I-20 application itself. Let's see. Okay, so this is the first part, and there's only 5 parts. As I mentioned, it's just 3 pages, so it's not as bad as it seems. And this is exactly what you would see. This is a screen grab I took right from our application, and I or Bridget will send the application through the chat before the close of this presentation, so you have it as well. So part 1 is really very simple. It just asks for demographic information, personal information, and this is taken right from your passport, right from the ID page of your passport. So it shouldn't be too terribly confusing to fill out. We do still require that you submit a photocopy of your passport's identification page. We can't just take this personal information without having that passport page to confirm what we're seeing there, okay? But you can see it's very simple information. It's your first, middle, last name, your address in your home country, where you were born, where you're planning to live while you're attending NU, and just general information about the degree that you're going to be pursuing. Some of this information you may notice is not particularly relevant probably to our audience today. You can see there are some questions about Canadian citizenship. That's just because we are right on the border with Canada. So we have a very high number of Canadian students, and Canadian students go through a little bit of a different process. So this is one way for us to make sure that we are giving you the correct information about how to apply for your visa by starting to separate out whether or not you're a Canadian citizen. So just go over the information carefully and fill it out clearly so that we can read and understand what you've got there, okay? You'll see at the top, there are 2 individuals in our office, as we've mentioned, who can help you. Serena Munzie is the name listed on the I-20 certificate. Her email and where we are on campus is listed there. And then, of course, I'm always happy to help as well. So my contact information is there and will be included in a couple of the different handouts you'll receive today. Okay, so we're going to move right to part 2 on the I-20 application. And this section is actually likely not going to apply to many of you. So you may just skip this section completely. You'll see it's completed only if you're already in the United States. Okay, so this would be for someone who's applying for an I-20 application from NU, but you're physically already in the United States. And this most commonly happens if you attended a high school in the United States, or you were already attending a college or university in the United States and you'd like to transfer to Niagara. So my guess is this wouldn't apply to you, so you would be able to skip it completely. Now we are looking at part 3. And again, this is very simple. This is just asking you how you want to receive your I-20. I mentioned previously, we do email you a scanned copy of your I-20, so you'll have a digital version of it. But we also really recommend that you make arrangements to receive a hard copy of it. This is just for security purposes so that you have the original document. All embassies and consulates are working under the understanding that digital I-20s are acceptable, but we always want to err on the side of caution and be better safe than sorry and get you that original I-20, okay? And you can see you've got 2 options. You can choose standard mail or by express mail. And again, we really, really encourage you to make arrangements for express mail. And that's just because it allows you to have tracking. So if it is lost, which has happened to us before, you are aware of that and you're not being held up in terms of making a visa appointment. We can get you another one mailed out right away. So this again is just making a selection in terms of how you'd like to receive your I-20. Hopefully pretty straightforward. So part 4 is absolutely where we see students struggle the most and have the most questions. So we'll take a little bit of time going through here, okay? Part 4 is the financial requirements and support. And this piece of the I-20 application is where you need to prove to the US government that you have the financial eligibility and the financial capability to support yourself while you are studying in the United States. So most of our international students do actually work in some capacity while they're here studying, but keep in mind you're not applying for a work visa. The F1 visa you're applying for is a student visa. So the government really wants to see that you would be able to financially support yourself without working throughout your program of study. And that's what this piece allows them to review, okay? You can see that we've outlined some common expenses that students encounter during their application and their studies at Niagara. So the first, of course, is tuition. The next is those associated fees, paying for books, room and board, medical insurance, unfortunately, in the US is quite pricey, and then general other living expenses. So you see the total estimated expenses there is about $54,280. I want to be clear, this is not your bill for Niagara, right? You may never see this number charged to you. This is just an estimate that the government has and asks for so that they can feel confident that when you come here, you do have the monetary amount necessary to study and not to focus on working while you're here. So you won't necessarily ever be charged this amount by NU, and we won't ask you to cut a check for this amount. That's not the point. This is just so we can see you have enough to live comfortably while you are a student in the United States. And if we have questions about this, I'm happy to take them at the end, okay? So if you're working with Bridget, my guess is you're an undergraduate. And like I said, you're looking at that $54,280. And it sounds like a lot, and it is, but I want to reassure you this money can come from a couple of different areas. So let's take a look at what that would look like. So you'll see on point number 1, your minimum financial requirement, that would be the $54,280. You have to provide proof you have that amount, and it has to be immediately accessible funds. Now, section 2 right there, you can indicate where this funding is going to come from. And you can see it says you may have multiple sources. So it doesn't just have to be a bank account in your name where you have this large sum of money. And actually, we very rarely see that. So you'll see 2A is your personal funds. That would be financial documents in your name specifically. So if I were filling out this I-20 application, that's where I would put any money that I'm contributing in accounts that has Amanda Barber, my name on it, and nobody else's, okay? If you do happen to have all of the funds in your name, wonderful, you would stop there. If not, you'd move to 2B, and that's where we see sponsors. And sponsors are anyone who is willing to support you financially through your studies or provide proof that they have the financial means to support you. So again, this could be a family member, it could be a company, if you are employed somewhere and they're sending you here to study, an organization. We most frequently see 2B in terms of parents or family members that are going to contribute proof of financial eligibility there. So again, if I'm applying, perhaps it's my mom, and so her bank account, her bank statement would be there, and it wouldn't have my name, Amanda, it would have my mother's name on it. So that would go under 2B. And then the last piece actually is something that we do see a fair amount with our international students, and that's scholarships. So whether that's a merit-based scholarship, an athletic scholarship, that money that you're receiving can also count towards your proof of financial eligibility. And we would just need a letter. So if you're receiving the funds through Niagara itself, we can very easily get that from our financial office. But if it's an outside scholarship, you would need to include that letter as well, so we can see the funds you have coming from that scholarship. And then you'll see number 3 is where you add up the amounts you have in personal funds, in sponsored funds, and in scholarships. And number 3 must at least meet that 54,280. It certainly can surpass it. It can be greater than that, but it cannot be less than, or we would need proof of additional finances. Okay. And again, this is money that must be available to you now at the time of applying, but that doesn't mean that we're ever coming to, take the money from your accounts. We're just looking at it. We're just looking to see that it's there. So oftentimes students may move money around a little bit to reach that number, that 54,280. And then after they've received their I-20, you can move the money back into whatever accounts you pulled it from. So this is definitely where students can feel a little confused, a little overwhelmed. So let's take a look actually at some example documents that we have created to help illustrate what we're looking for in terms of proof of financial eligibility. So you can see here, this is an example of a letter from a bank. A letter from a bank is a wonderful document to submit. Sometimes students and parents don't feel comfortable printing out, their savings or checkings account. Totally understandable. You can just contact your bank and ask them to write a letter certifying that you have X amount of money, and that is an acceptable form of proof of financial eligibility. There are a couple of things though when we're reviewing your documents that we're going to look for. Okay. So first of all, we need to make sure that it is on a bank letterhead, and you can see it's highlighted there, Brennan Center Bank, our fake bank for the purposes of this. It needs to be dated. As I mentioned, it cannot be older than 6 months from your program start date. There has to be an account holder name on it. So again, it could be your name, it could be a sponsor's name, but whose money is it that we're looking at? And then it should specify the account type and the current available balance. And that's all highlighted in red there in the example bank letter. And then we do also only accept certain kinds of financial accounts. And again, that's because the money has to be immediately accessible to you at the time of applying. So savings or checking accounts, I would say, are the most common. line of credit accounts, loans, retirement funds are acceptable, but it has to be, again, immediately available. So if it is kind of stuck or frozen until you or a parent reach a certain age, that would not be permissible for the purposes of the I-20. And then scholarships, as I mentioned before. So those are the 5 types of accounts that we would be looking for. You can see again here we have a statement of account. This is again our fake Brennan Center Bank, just to illustrate what we're looking for. You see there's the letterhead, as I mentioned. It is dated within 6 months of the start of your program. I did not mention this immediately in this section, but it is very important that these statements are in English. And again, that's not just for our purposes, it's for the purposes of your F1 visa interview. Your consulate or embassy worker will actually be looking over your financial documents. And so they're also going to look to make sure it's in English, as all of your visa interview pieces will be completed in English. And we'll get to that in a minute. But it's not just us selfishly wanting to be able to understand, it is to set you up for success once you reach the embassy, okay? If it's not in English, that's fine, but you would have to make sure that you submit it with a translation certificate. And that can sometimes take a bit of time, so do keep that in mind, okay? We look for it to be in US funds or include the institution's US equivalent. So obviously the amount that I referenced before, the 54,000 roughly, that's in US dollars. And we know we have students coming from all over, but all of it has to be that minimum 54,280 in US dollars. So oftentimes you will have a bank statement like this printed out, and either your bank or someone working at the bank would be able to write a letter or an accompanying statement that testifies how much that would be in US dollars. And then it just needs to be clear and legible. Obviously, all of our documents do. Sometimes with the scanning and copying, it can get a little hazy or a little unclear. But we would communicate if we had any concerns about that at all. So those are the kinds of accounts we're looking for, and those are the criteria of the accounts that we would be looking for. And as I mentioned, I know this is a lot of information, and specifically this financial eligibility is where students have the most concerns. They run into the most issues. Myself and my colleague Serena are always happy to look over your financial documents. And again, this is never a situation in which if you submit your I-20 application and your financial documents do not meet our criteria that you are, rejected for an I-20. That's not really how this works. We would just respond, explain our concerns, and ask you to make changes to the documents based on whatever criteria is not being met. So it is a conversation between you as the applicant and us as the reviewer, but we will work closely together until we feel confident you have an application that would be approved for an I-20 in our office, and then also looked favorably upon once you reach the embassy for your F1 interview, okay? So that was part 4, and we're going to move to part 5. And so this is the final part. We've reached the final part of the I-20 application here. And this is just signatures. So again, hopefully very easy. This is the section where if you have someone who is sponsoring you, they would need to sign. So as I mentioned before, in my I-20 application, I have funds in my own name, Amanda Barber, but my mom will sponsor me as well. So I have her bank documents, and then she would also need to sign here. So under sponsor 1, she would write her name, and then her relationship to me is my mother, and she would date it, okay? And then I would sign right there on the applicant's signature because it's my I-20 we're applying for. If you have no sponsors, if all of the funds are in your name, you skip the sponsor signatures and you just sign on the applicant's signature line right there, okay? The signature is basically just confirming that everything you've included in the packet, all of your supporting documents and the information you've put into this I-20 application is true and it's accurate, and that you understand this I-20 process. You understand that if there's any falsified information, any misleading information, you would automatically be denied the right to an I-20, okay? So again, part 5, just some signatures, hopefully very easy. And this brings us to the end of the I-20 application. My biggest tip is just to take your time in completing it. Make sure you have the information and documentation that meets the criteria outlined in the application. All of this information is included in the application, so you can check all of your documents for yourself to make sure it is what we would require. But again, we will take that last look over and make sure everything looks as it should, okay? We are gonna move right ahead and go back to our F1 visa process and pick up kind of where we left off. So as I said, you paid that CVIS fee online, the $350. That is a federal fee. As I mentioned, it's not something Niagara charges. That money does not come to us. It goes to the US government. So I've linked there where you can find more information about this fee and how to pay it exactly. One piece of advice I want to give you with that CVIS fee is you should be able to print or access a printer when you're paying the fee, because you will receive proof of payment, like a receipt, and that needs to be printed and brought to your visa interview. So, if you're using a mobile device or your phone to pay, you're just going to want to make sure you've got a way to then save that receipt and print it, because when you're going to your visa interview, you're going to need hard copies of all of your documents. You're not going to want to be showing digital documents. So you've got to be able to print that proof of payment as it's required. So then you've paid your CVIS fee. You're going to start making arrangements for your visa interview. And you can find details online. I'll send these links through the chat as well. The details are linked there mostly because at this point, I'm not going to go too in depth because it varies country to country. And as Bridget said, we have over 30 countries registered for this information session. And honestly, at this point, our office has a relatively limited capacity to help because the relationship now has shifted between you as the applicant and us as the I-20 issuer to you as the applicant and the embassy or consulate as the F1 visa issuer. And in the United States, we have a certain culture of and certain expectation of privacy and right to privacy. So there is a very limited amount of information and a limited role that Serena and I can take in advocating for you with the embassy, as we are not really privy or allowed to know the details of your application. The embassy and consulate simply won't share that information with us. They wouldn't disclose your personal records or anything of that nature to us. Generally speaking, though, once you've gotten your CVIS fee paid, there's usually an online application, the DS-160, again, completed online, that you have to finish. You usually have to upload some passport photos and then schedule your interview. There may be other associated fees. It, again, will depend on where you're at and what embassy or consulate you're applying through. And then prepare for your interview. So really making sure you've got all of the required documents. And again, those documents should be printed, hard copies, not digitally shown to your embassy or consulate worker, and then prepare for your interview. And again, we'll get to some tips for the interview in just a moment. That link will also give you an estimate of wait time. I know that that's always a concern for students, understandably so. Particularly with COVID, wait times have gotten to be a little crazy, but we've seen actually a marked improvement in the past month or so, and we feel confident it'll keep moving in the right direction for the fall. So I don't have too many concerns as long as we continue moving in the right direction in terms of COVID as well. But again, we just ask that you do plan accordingly. Like I said at the beginning of this, you should be applying for your I-20 3 to 4 months before the start of your program. And as soon as you've got it, start making these visa arrangements so you have plenty of time. And then after you've done all of that online work, you attend your visa interview on the day that you scheduled. And hopefully, if all goes well, you will receive that F1 visa. And then that final step is coming to the United States. And the important thing to remember there is that you cannot arrive more than 30 days before the program start date. You could be denied entry into the country, so don't try to risk it. It would be an awful shame if you were not allowed in because you arrived too early. And then again, I mentioned that international check-in, which we remind you about along the way. So it's not something to worry about at this point. Okay. So that's what it looks like from start to finish in terms of applying for your I-20 and getting your F1 visa. And now we're just going to talk very briefly about some tips and tricks for the visa interview. I know that this is an area of worry and anxiety for some students, so we'll just go over a couple of tips for being successful. My first tip is be prepared, okay? So you've got to bring all of your required documents, and this is going to vary from embassy to embassy. Different embassies and consulates require a different level of documentation from their applicants. So you need to do your due diligence and look into the requirements for your embassy or consulate. This would likely be communicated to you as you're making your visa appointment. But you want to double and triple check before you head to that appointment that you've got everything that they asked you to have. Often you're looking at least your I-20, your proof of financial eligibility, your passport, your proof of that CVIS fee payment, likely a printed copy of the application you completed online to schedule the interview. And again, if you're missing pieces, I would be very surprised if they approve you anyway. So you want to be careful there because that is just an unnecessary reason for being denied, right? You also want to make sure that you know the program of study you've applied for and why you've selected it, okay? We often see questions related to program of study. So, what is your major? Why have you chosen it? And also questions related to the university you've chosen. So what drew you to Niagara, and what drew you to the program you're going to be enrolling in at Niagara specifically. Be prepared to answer those questions. The second point here, English proficiency matters. You should absolutely anticipate that all parts of the interview and communication with the embassy or consulate will be conducted in English, okay? And you should be able to navigate that interview without difficulty. As I mentioned before, we do have an ESL program here at NU. So if you needed English language support, you should be applying for the ESL program rather than a bachelor's program, okay? If you are struggling to communicate with your embassy or consulate worker during the interview, they are going to assume that your proficiency is not up to par for bachelor's level study, and you would likely be denied, okay? So you really want to practice these questions and answers with family, with friends, with anyone who has proficiency in English and can act as a coach there. The third point, demonstrate ties to your home country. So an F1 visa is what we call a non-immigrant visa. So you are not planning to move to the United States permanently. A non-immigrant visa is one that allows you to move here temporarily. So you're coming here for your course of study, the duration of your program, and then we want to see that you have plans to depart the United States. And this is often also a reason for denial here. So make sure you're clear on this. You want to have very clear, strong reasons to return to your home country or even a third country. So maybe you have plans of studying at the graduate level in Canada or something along those lines. And again, this could include family ties. So if all of your family is in your home country and you have close family ties with them, that's excellent. Perhaps you have a job offer that is waiting for you once you complete your course of study, a bank account with a certain amount that is tied to your home country, something that is showing that you do have an intention to return or at least depart the United States at the close of your program. And I do want to say here, this is for the purposes of the visa interview. We have many, many, many students that come as an undergraduate student and then do stay for a master's program or for work permissions. But for the purposes of the visa interview, really the consulate or embassy is looking to see that you are coming here with the purposes of studying for your program. And then of course, Serena and myself can help you explore what other options you have, but that's not what you want to focus on for your visa interview, okay? And then 3B, do remember that this is a student visa, okay? It's not a work visa. That's not to say that you don't have the right to work while you're a student, but it should not be the focus of this visa interview. Many students, as I mentioned, work in some capacity. They have internships, something along those lines, but that should not be the focus of the conversation that you're having with your embassy or consulate worker. That would definitely raise some red flags, okay? It could absolutely be a reason for a denial as well. And one last set of tips and tricks. Number 4, be polite and respectful no matter what. Hopefully that goes without saying. You are interacting with a government official representing the United States abroad. So even if you are denied a visa and you think it is unfair or unjust or unclear as to why, you want to make sure that you stay calm, you remain polite and respectful. And if you are denied, I would really suggest you try to get an explanation in writing if possible as to why, what was concerning in the documents or in the interview to the worker you're interacting with, because you do have the right to reapply. So if you are able to understand what went wrong, we can help you better prepare for your second attempt. And having it in writing is most clear, I would say. And then lastly, just a quick overview of the kinds of questions we most frequently see. I did touch on this a little bit before. So 5A, your program of study, why have you chosen this major? What do you want to do with it? What specifically about this major is attractive to you that you would come to the United States to study? So think about why studying this specific field in the US instead of your home country is important to you. 5B, your chosen university. So why Niagara? What about NU is appealing? 5C is financial question. So I referenced this when we were looking at those pieces for financial eligibility, but they will very likely look over your financial eligibility very closely, which is why both Serena and I tried to do a close review of your documents as well. If they have concerns about where the money's coming from or sponsors, anything like that, there could be questions about that. And then 5D, your post-graduation plans. Again, they want to see that you have plans to depart the United States once you've completed your program of study and you're not trying to necessarily move here permanently. Okay. And then just a final note, I always want to remind students that the first step in this process is to receive your I-20, your certificate of eligibility from our office. And that certificate just says to the US government, based on what we think, you should be allowed to receive an F1 visa. So that's the first step. The second step is applying for and receiving this F1 visa. And that's from your consulate or embassy. Really, your final step is being permitted to enter at a United States port of entry. Your I-20 and your F1 allows you the right to travel to a US port of entry. So if I'm flying from Paris to JFK in New York City, my I-20 and my F1 says to all travel agents and Customs and Border Protection agents that both the university and the embassy feel I should be permitted to enter the United States to study. But once you arrive here and you are entering the United States, again, if I'm coming through New York City, JFK, you will have to go through a little bit of an interview again with another Customs and Border Protection agent. And they're going to actually be the final determinant if you are eligible to be admitted into the United States. So again, keep in mind, you want to obviously be politeful, be respectful, be open to additional questioning if they have follow-up questions or concerns. And you will also have a packet of documents that you'll want to have ready for that Customs and Border Protection agent. Again, all of the information that we presented in this PowerPoint, we email to you and we communicate to you step by step. So once we send you the I-20 and we receive word that you've received your F1 visa and you're making arrangements to come to the United States, we tell you exactly what we want you to have in hand so that you can have a successful entrance to the United States. But just a general reminder that those documents don't automatically admit you to the United States. It just means you are recommended to be admitted to the United States. Certainly there are a couple of different hurdles, challenges along the way, but I feel confident if you follow the information in this presentation, you reach out if you're having questions or difficulty, we can really be successful in getting you here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point. I know that was a lot of information, and I guess we can turn it over to Bridget. And Bridget, if you just have some final points and then maybe move into Q&A.
Yeah, for sure. But before we do that, I just wanted to give Ella an opportunity to introduce herself, to see if she has anything additional she'd like to add to the presentation. So hi, Ella.
Hello. Hi, everybody. My name is Eleni. You can also call me Ella. I'm an international student from Ethiopia, and I've went through the same process with SAVIS, with the visa process and everything. And my process was kind of difficult because it was during the COVID year. So it might be a little bit different than what you guys are probably going to go through. But if you have any questions, let me know. But I'm going to tell you some of my experiences that I went through when I was applying. So I actually lived in Turkey, and I applied for the U.S. Embassy in Turkey. So it was not as difficult as you think it may be. As long as you have your, like Amanda mentioned, as long as you have your passport, your valid passport, your SAVIS, your I-20 and everything, you're gonna be okay. There's nothing you should be worried about. But one advice I'll give you right now is, once you get your I-20, just don't waste time having scheduling your visa appointment, because it's still like the COVID is still affecting a lot of embassies. So make sure you apply as fast as possible and get your documents ready. And if you have any more questions, let me know.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ella. Ella is my student assistant, and she works here in the international office. So if you have any questions or anything like that, Ella is very eager to connect with you guys. I'm sure, Ella, if you want to leave your contact information in the chat box, I'm sure some of the students here would be happy to connect with you as well.
Of course, I'm going to leave my email and my phone number in the chat box if you guys want to contact.
Amanda right now is leaving some really important information for you in the chat box here, so feel free to download all of these great resources and for your reference in the future, scheduling your visa appointments, all this helpful stuff for you as well. So I do have a couple questions that I kind of have as well, because I'm still learning everything. Amanda, I do have a quick question. So sometimes now with like technology advancements and things like that, we're able to complete forms online. Should my I-20 be printed out and then written in pen and ink and then scanned and sent over to you, or am I able to type my responses into the form?
That's a really good question, especially since COVID has changed how we operate. We do allow digital signatures. So that is an option for students, and for Serena and I, we can digitally sign off on documents. So the I-20 application, both your application to us and us returning it to you, can be completed entirely online.
Would I need to complete my I-20 each year? So say that I finish my first year at Niagara or wherever I choose to go to school, do I need to reapply for my I-20 every single year?
Such a good question. No, this is just a one-time application unless you do decide to continue on in a different program of study. So for example, Ella has her I-20 for a bachelor's level program. If she decided she wanted to continue on in a master's level program, she would have to resubmit these documents for a master's level program. But no, if you're applying for an I-20 for a bachelor's level of study, your I-20 will be good for the duration of your program. So that's normally 4 years for a bachelor's program. And that's also the same for those financial documents. So it's not like every year we're going to be looking for proof of your financial eligibility. It's just one and done, okay? If we can get it taken care of once, we'll issue that I-20 and we won't come looking for any additional information from you aside from that international check-in.
We have another question in the chat box here for you too. Are we able to work on campus if we're on an F1 visa?
That is a wonderful question. You are permitted to work on campus for up to 20 hours per week while school is in session, okay? If it is a holiday or like summer vacation, you can work over 20 hours. So you could potentially work full time during those breaks. Again, I would not focus on this during your visa interview because that's not the purpose of your visa, but for your own understanding of your rights as an F1 student, you absolutely do have the right to work on campus. Off-campus work is a different situation, and we would be happy to counsel you accordingly once you're here.
Awesome, thank you. Another question, will my visa be valid for the entire 4 years, or would I need to get it reissued each year?
So it should be valid actually for longer than 4 years, but that would depend on your embassy or consulate. So you would be issued a visa accordingly, depending on where you're applying from. It's very, very rare. I've never heard of it being issued for less than your duration of your program, unless you are someone who maybe came here to do high school, or if you are someone who came here for a bachelor's program and then continued for a master's. Perhaps if you've been here studying for so many years, your visa could expire. But if you're just coming here for a 4-year program, you should be fine. And then I saw Ella put the question, what happens if your visa expires? That's a really good question. Part of the international check-in that we require all students to complete at the beginning of every semester is to check your documents, because we find that students have so many pieces of information they're trying to keep track of. Sometimes things expire without you realizing. So we try to help on that end. If your visa does expire while you're here in the United States, you have a couple of options. First, you can just stay here on an expired visa, and that is a valid option. But you would be stuck in the United States, because once you leave the US on an expired visa, you cannot come back until you get a new visa. So for example, if your visa expires and you only have 1 year left of study and you don't want to make arrangements to get a new visa, you can just stay in the US, finish your year of study, and then at the end, leave the United States. That does not have any negative consequences for you as a non-immigrant. If that makes you uncomfortable because you want to be able to move freely in and out of the United States, you would need to return home and do this again, right? You'd have to get another appointment at an embassy or consulate and get an updated visa. So you've got some options. And again, if this were to happen while you were a student here, we would help you along the way. I do want to emphasize that once you're here, you're not on your own, okay? Our office is here to help you in terms of maintaining your status, but also just for helping you find community while you're here. We do have, like I said, language support, academic support, but then social emotional support as well in terms of activities going on campus. We're having a pizza party here this week because we're almost to spring break. So you should never feel that you are on your own. There is always someone here that can help you with these problems.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. And I can totally emphasize the student experience and all that stuff too. I'm sure Ella can touch on that for you guys as well. I have a couple questions about section 4, I think the big part. So I have one very specific one that I think is super helpful. So there's the estimated total cost of our tuition, which is about $54,000 a year. But say that you earned a $10,000 scholarship. Do they need to have be able to pay for the $54,000, or do they have to present that they can pay the balance, the remaining balance of their tuition costs?
So if you have a scholarship for $10,000, say you're an athlete, you're here on a tennis scholarship and you get $10,000, we would have a scholarship letter from Niagara, and that applies to your $54,000. So we would deduct that. You would then only be responsible for showing $44,000. So the scholarships count towards cutting back on whatever amount you have to show. And let's just jump in really quickly. I sent a link that was in the PowerPoint. Just want to make sure that you all have it. It's very helpful. It gives all of the information about the F1 visa. So again, we focus in our office on the I-20, and then the F1 visa is when you move to working with your embassy or consulate. And that link has all of the information you would need. And it does even give you a time estimate of how far out in advance the embassy or consulate nearest you is booking appointments for F1 applicants, which hopefully will help relax some of you that feel maybe a little anxious about timelines.
Awesome. And then real quick, if your parents are your sponsors, you would just put them in section 2B, right?
Yeah, so if your parents are your sponsors, you can either co-list them as one. So like my parents have the same last name, so I could just say, Cheryl and Scott Barber, or if you want to list them separately, that's fine as well. Sponsor 1 and sponsor 2, either is appropriate.
We have a question talking about working as well. Are you able to work off campus, or do you have to work on campus on an F1 visa?
Working off campus is very, very strictly regulated. I'm not going to get into it in this presentation. Once you're a student here, we do many presentations about how to work and maintain your status while in the US. I would not plan on working off campus because it is very strictly regulated. If that's something you're interested in, again, we are so happy to help guide you through that once you're here, but not something to worry about at this point.
Awesome, thank you. And then I believe this is we have a couple more. So someone has a passport, they're asking, what is the deadline? So their passport expires in 2025, let's say. Is that valid, or should it have more time?
So your passport should be valid for the duration of your program. My guess is, and again, this is going to vary from embassy to embassy. So this is something that I would encourage you to reach out to your embassy to confirm, because it also varies country to country. So we always tell students your passport should absolutely be valid for at least the duration of your program. So if you're going to start with us in the fall of 2022 and your passport expires in 2025, that would give me cause for concern.
More questions. We do have additional financial aid opportunities for students. If you're interested in learning more about that, you can just shoot me an email. Do I need to show the finance backing for the first year or all 4 years? So I think that goes back to the question that we had. Do I need to fill it out each year?
Yeah, and that's just that 54,000 is just an estimate for what 1 year of expenses would cost. So it is just proof of financial eligibility just for 1 year.
And then we'll take one last question. Do we pay health insurance annually or together for the entire 4 years?
So unfortunately, that figure you see there, that 2,600, that's an annual fee. Health insurance in the United States is very expensive. And I do want to say our international students often are shocked at how expensive it is. As an American citizen, my health insurance is also very expensive. So it's not discriminatory, or it's not targeted at you. It's not a moneymaker. Unfortunately, the healthcare system in the United States is just not functioning at its best. So that amount is going to be yearly. And particularly during COVID, we are very strict on making sure international students have appropriate coverage. So there's not a lot of wiggle room there, not a lot of flexibility.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. Many, many thanks for all of the great information today. Amanda did put her email in the chat box for you guys. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to her about I-20 visa questions, anything like that. If you're interested in the ESL program as well, she's going to be your point of contact too. But thank you all for joining us today. It's so great to see all of you. And like I said, I'll put my email in the chat box as well. My email is Gorman, my last name Gorman at niagara.edu. I hope to connect with all of you soon. And once again, thanks for stopping by today.